The apartment was old, charming but old. The floorboards creaked a welcome beneath her feet and sunlight struggled to pierce the dusty windows. She shivered, a strange feeling creeping up her spine. It wasn't bad exactly, but unsettling. She shook off the feeling. It was her apartment now, and she was determined to make it a home. The walls were high, painted a pale yellow that had probably once been vibrant. She ran her hand over the rough texture, imagining the stories they could tell. The building had stood for over a century, she knew. 100 years of laughter, of tears, of secrets whispered in the dead of night. She turned away, busying herself with unpacking boxes. She wouldn't let an old building spook her, or so she thought. It started subtly, a soft murmur in the dead of night. She would lie awake, listening to the silence of the old building, and she'd hear it. A whisper, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves outside her window. She dismissed it at first. The wind perhaps, or the settling of the ancient structure. But the whispers persisted. They seemed to weave in and out of her dreams, brushing against her consciousness like cobwebs in the dark. One night she woke with a start. The whisper was closer now, more insistent. It slithered around the edges of her awareness, a cold breath on the back of her neck. Her heart pounded in her chest. She strained to hear, to make sense of the sound. It was definitely a voice, she realized. A low guttural voice speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Something wasn't right. "Sarah!" The voice, clear as a bell, sliced through the darkness. Sarah sat bolt upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The whisper was gone, replaced by the deafening silence of the apartment. She strained to hear, her breath caught in her throat. Had she imagined it? Had the whispers finally driven her mad? "Sarah!" The voice came again, closer this time, emanating from the wall beside her bed. Sarah scrambled back, her eyes wide with terror. The voice was unmistakable. It was her name. Her own name, whispered with a chilling familiarity. She fumbled for the bedside lamp, her hand trembling. The sudden burst of light seemed to banish the voice, pushing it back into the shadows. She stayed awake for the rest of the night, huddled beneath the covers. The whispers returned, fainter now, but laced with a new urgency. They called her name, over and over again. The feeling of being watched became a constant presence. She felt it everywhere she went in the apartment. In the bathroom mirror, a fleeting glimpse of movement in the reflection. In the shadows at the edge of her vision, a sense of something lurking just beyond sight. The whispers followed her too, weaving in and out of her thoughts like venomous snakes. "Sarah, listen, hear." She tried to ignore it all. She blasted music to drown out the whispers, kept the lights on long after the sun had set. But the fear remained, a knot of dread that tightened its grip with each passing day. She was losing her mind, she thought. The apartment, once a haven, had become a prison. The walls seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with their unseen presence. One evening as she sat reading, she felt a cold draft on her neck. She turned, expecting to find an open window, but the windows were closed, the curtains drawn tight. The draft persisted, cold and sharp, like an icy finger trailing down her spine. Her gaze darted to the wall where she had heard the voice. At first she saw nothing, then her heart lurched, a crack, a hairline fracture in the paint, almost invisible to the naked eye. It hadn't been there before, she couldn't be sure, but it looked like the crack had spread, a thin, jagged line snaking its way across the once smooth surface. She approached the wall cautiously, her hand outstretched. The air around it felt different somehow, colder, charged with an unseen energy. She hesitated, her fingers hovering inches from the crack. A strange compulsion drew her closer, a need to understand, to see what lay hidden beneath the surface. As she leaned in, her ear brushing against the cold plaster, she heard it again, the whisper. But this time it was different. It was closer, louder, filled with an urgency that sent chills racing down her spine. "Sarah, help me!" The crack in the wall widened as she watched, the edges crumbling under an unseen force. A low, guttural growl emanated from within, vibrating through the plaster. Sarah stumbled back, her heart pounding. Something was in there. Something was trying to get out. The plaster crumbled, revealing a glimpse of darkness beyond. A single bloodshot eye appeared, staring at her with chilling intensity. The last thing she saw before the wall exploded inward was a grotesque skeletal hand reaching for her.